Good evening everyone. Welcome to Tech Tutorials 2K21. So today is day 8 live session in Master Core Java in 30 days course. The concept is constructors in Java. The agenda of today class is we'll start with the definition of constructor and then we'll see what are the rules for constructing constructors in Java programming, and we'll move on to different types of constructors: copy constructor, constructor overloading, and constructor chaining. So these are the concepts today we are going to learn with the practical sessions. So I'll start with the definition of constructor. So as of now, in yesterday class, we discussed about the class, object and methods concept. So there we'll see like how we are going to assign a values to your data members of a class using methods. So as like your method, your constructor is also do the same thing. But the constructors are said to be a special methods because the purpose is initialization of objects. So simply we can take a definition of a constructor. So it is a special method which is used to initialize the objects. So object initialization is nothing but we are trying to assign values to your data members of a class. So there will be a little bit difference between the method and constructor to assigning a values to your data members of a class. I will show you when I'm going to explain with the program. So we need not to call your constructors explicitly as like your methods. So these constructors are called when an object of a class is created. And the main purpose of the constructor is to initialize the values to object attributes. So simply we are taking a class like student. Suppose your student class is having an attributes or the data members named student name, roll number, gender, address, whatever it will be. So now we are going to assign values in multiple ways. Directly you are going to assign, or else you can use your methods to assign values. And this method is using constructor to assign values to your attributes of the objects. So why constructor is said to be a special method? Because it doesn't do more than that initialization to a objects. So it can do only the initialization of an object. It cannot do more than that. By simply you can use your user defined methods. As of yesterday we discussed, like get student info is a method which is going to assign some values to your data members. We are using another method called display method, which is used to display the values of your class. Whereas this constructor is also a special type of method, but it cannot do more than that than initialization of objects. So that is the main difference between the constructor and the method. You can use methods and you can do whatever you want. But by constructor we cannot do anything rather than the initialization of an object. Because of that, constructors are said to be special methods. And then what are the rules we have to follow to write the constructors in your Java programming? So as like see, in yesterday's class we discussed when you are going to declare some methods or define some methods, you have to follow some rules. What is that? You have to specify the return type, and then you can specify the method name, and before that you can specify your access specifier, and within parameter list you can specify the values which you are going to assign. So that is a rule for writing a method. Whereas constructor also we can have some rules. to write the constructor in your Java program. So we'll see that rules before you are going to implement the constructor concept in Java. So now, rules for creating a Java constructor. So always remember, constructor name must be the same as your class name. So whatever your class name and your method name should be same. Then only it is called a constructor. And constructor must have no explicit return types. So we don't have any return type to constructor. Like void, int, average, double, float. We cannot give any return type before the constructor name. So that is the second rule. And third rule, and the Java constructor, it cannot be abstract, static, final and synchronized. So means we cannot make the constructor as an abstract, static, final or synchronized. We cannot use these keywords along with the constructor name. So simply we can see the constructor is having the name of your class name and it doesn't have any explicit return types like integer, character, string or double. And constructors cannot be used with the keywords like abstract, static, final and synchronized. So these are the rules we can keep in mind before we are going to implement the constructor concept in a Java programming. So then, what are different types of constructors we have? So in Java programming language, we have two types of constructors. So first one is called the default constructor or no argumented constructor, like we don't have any arguments in your constructor. And the second type is parameterized constructor, like we can pass some arguments. So depends on whether it is taking an argument or not, your constructions can be taken as two ways, like default and parameterized. So we'll move on to each and everything and we'll go with an examples and try to understand the concept of constructors. So now coming to a default constructor, simply we can say a constructor that doesn't having any parameters. So it doesn't have any parameters is known as a default constructor. So if we don't define any constructor in a class, suppose we are not providing any constructor, default constructor in a class, even though the compiler it creates a default constructor with no arguments for the class. So I will show you. Suppose if you want to create a default constructor in your program, so simply you can use a syntax like this. So like you can provide your constructor and I already said your constructor name, it must be your class name. And here we have a body of constructor. So for default constructor, we don't have any body. Like we are not specifying anything inside of your constructor. Right? Simply suppose if you want to give any printer statements, you can give those statements. That is not any assigning things or anything in your program. So what this default constructor will do is, whenever you are given a default constructor explicitly in your program, like you can write a default constructor in your program. When the object of your class is created, so it automatically assign some default values to your attributes. So I already mentioned yesterday, your class variables or instance variables or having some default values. For strings it is null and for numerical values it will be 0. So what this point will say, even you are not given any default constructor in your program, right? So your compiler, it automatically creates a default constructor for your class and it is going to assign some default values. Suppose if you are forgotten to assign the values to your object, then this default constructor is going to assign the default values to your data members of a class. So I will show you an example for your default constructor on desktop. So today we'll discuss So this is a program for default constructor. So now you can see here my class name is student default. So you can give any name. Here I am given my class name as student default. So this class will consisting 4 data members like name, roll number, gender and address. So now you can see this is my default constructor because this method name is similar to my class name. So what is the rule? Whenever we want to use a constructor, the name of the constructor, it must be same as your class name. So whatever your class name, and you can give that name as to method. So now this method is said to be a special method called constructor. See here I didn't given any body, so here I am not providing any statements, right? And this is my display method, and here I am going to display the student name, roll number, gender and address. And in my main method, and here I am creating an object SD for my class student default, and this is my default constructor. I said already yesterday, like this is the way of creating object. Like you can provide your class name and then specify your object name, use a new keyword, and here it is a constructor. So what happening when you create an object itself, it is called a default constructor. So that's what we discussed. So we cannot explicitly call your constructor like your method. See here display is a normal method. Because of that reason we are using this object and we are going to call this display method explicitly. Right? If you are not calling this method, then these values are not going to display on your screen. Because this is of user defined method, you need to call. Otherwise, nothing is displayed on your screen. So, I will show you in a multiple cases to execute the same program so that you all can understand. So, this is my program. I just said with student default is my class name. So, I need to go for my command prompt and I need to set my class path because I already set my programs. I'm going to saving on my desktop folder HTML. So because of that, I'm changing my path, my class path, and here I'm going to use the command javac is a Java compiler which will take your program with an extension of .java as an input. So my class name is here student default. So student default FAULT dot Java. So now it is going to compile. And after compilation, I didn't have any errors. Because of that reason, again it gave me a command prompt. So here I need to execute my program so that I can use interpreter Java. So here I am going to use my class name. So for interpreter, we cannot use again the .java file because after compilation, your Java virtual machine is going to create a .class file. So that file is going to be taken as an input. So for that you can give simply your class name. So now you can see here I am not providing any values to student name, roll number, gender and address. So what the compiler will do? So it automatically initialize default values. What I said for strings, the default value is null. So student name, gender and address is strings, so that it will assign with null. And the roll number is integer, it is going to assign with 0. Right? So now I'll show you the another cases. Suppose see for example here I'm given simply one statement like system dot out dot println. So this is a statement. So whatever I'm given here, that is going to be displayed on my screen. So I just here I said like default constructor is called. Default constructor is called. So now I just say this and I just recompile and execute so that you can find out this statement is displayed on your monitor. So Java C. So after compilation I need to execute. Now you can see before it is going to install the values, the default values to your data members of a class, it is displayed the string like default constructor is called. So whenever you create object here, what's happening at the time itself, it is calling the default constructor, and what are the things you provided, that is executed, and later you are calling display method. So when you are calling this display method, and these statements are going to executed. And now you can see I am not explicitly call my default constructor by using s dot something. So here I remove this statement. Now you can see nothing is going to be displayed on your screen, because that is a normal method. Definitely I need to instantiate with my object. Otherwise that method is not recognized. See, simply I can execute again this program. So now you can see. So what's happening? It will display like default constructor is called. Even though I am not explicitly calling my constructor, when my object is created, at that time it is going to call my constructor. That is done by my Java compiler. So when coming to a normal method, when I want to execute this normal method, I need to call explicitly by using my object, dot method name. So this is explicit calling of method, right? So this is explicit calling of method. So when you call like this, then only your compiler can recognize this method to call. Otherwise it cannot. So I just recompile and execute, and I'll show you the difference. So now you can see here I'm given again Java C and Java. See, now again you find. So default constructor is called, and by the display method is going to display all the default values which is set by your default constructor. So this is about a default constructor. So default constructor is nothing but a constructor with no arguments. A constructor with no arguments. So such type of constructor is said to be default constructor. Even you are not, see for example I'll show you. Even I am not providing explicitly this default constructor, right? So see, now there is no explicit default constructor is there. So what your Java compiler will do, it automatically creates a default constructor and it will assign values to your data members. So I save and execute the program. See, so that's what we discussed as of now. See, again I just compile this program and then I run this program. So now you can find out the default values for your data members. So that is the meaning of this. Even you are not created the default constructor explicitly in your program, even though the Java compiler will create the default constructor when an object is created, and it is called your default constructor, right? And it is going to assign those values to your data members of a class. Here in example, the data members of a class student default is student name, roll number, gender and address. Right? So this is about a default constructor. Okay, so this is about default constructor. And we move on to the next type of constructor. So that is parameterized constructor. So the difference between default and parameterized constructor is, so for your parameterized constructor, you have some arguments in your method. So arguments means you have list of arguments you can provide in your constructor. So such type of constructor is said to be parameterized constructor. I will show you. So now you can move on to the next type of constructor is parameterized constructor. So a constructor that has a parameters is known as parameterized constructor. So whenever we can use parameterized constructor means whenever we want to initialize the data members of your class with your own values. So if you are not providing any values, your constructor will take care of, and it is going to assign with default values. But at the time of your object is created, you don't need any default values. You want to assign your own values to your data members. Then you can use the parameterized constructor in your program. So that is the purpose of default and parameterized constructor. Right? So I just recall the things. When you are going to use your parameterized constructor, so we can use parameterized constructor in your program when we required or when we assign a values to your data members when an object of your class is created. Right? So, so this is the way how you are going to create your parameterized constructor. Simply you can give your constructor, that is your class name, and in argument list you can specify. So for what for what data member you are going to assign which value. So as like your method, you can do the same thing. But here the time of assigning the values are different. Because for parameterized constructor, at the time of object creation itself you are passing the values. Whereas for your methods, after creating object, you can call your method and you can pass the values. Right? As of yesterday what we discussed. So now I'll show you an example for parameterized constructor. So this is an example for parameterized constructor. So now you can see student constructor is my class name. Again it consisting the same data members like student name, roll number, gender and address. And now this is my constructor because it's having name of my class name. And then here these are the parameters. So here you can observe that I have 4 data members. So I need to pass 4 arguments. So one argument for assigning student name, and the second argument for assigning roll number, third argument for assigning the gender, and fourth argument for assigning the address. So for that here I am passing 4 arguments, and you just remember always your argument list must match with your data members. Otherwise it will be a problem. See here I have string, integer, character and string. Here I have string, integer, character and string. So now in the same way, like methods, you can also assign the values of these data members with the local variables. So these are the local variables. Now S name is assigned with S, roll number is assigned with R, and gender is assigned with G, and address is assigned with A. And after that, this is my display method which is going to display the values of my data members. Now you can find out the difference. So in yesterday, when you are using the methods concept, so what we are doing after creation of your object, here simply we are calling like sc dot get student info of, there we are going to pass these values. So whereas for parameterized constructor we cannot do that because the constructors can called by your Java compiler implicitly when an object is created. We need not to call the constructors explicitly by your object. So at the time of when my object is created, I can pass the values to my data members. That is the difference between the method of assigning and constructor with assigning. Right? So here I am created 2 objects, SC and SC1. So now the first object is going to assign values like Kaushik 15, male and Penduti. Whereas my second object is going to assign values like Uday 35, male and Gopalpatnam. So here I want to display these students' information. So that simply I am using system.out.println. So here I am calling my method display, which is going to display my first object details. And here I am calling my second object with display. So it is going to display my second object details. So I will execute this program. So here we are finding the difference between the method and constructor. Right? So for constructor, whenever you are creating an object, itself you are passing the values. For methods, after creating objects, you can call the method and we can pass the values. You just recall your previous program what we discussed yesterday so that you can identify the difference. So I just execute this program. So my class name is student constructor. So here I am given like Java C student constructor dot Java. So now you can find out here I didn't have any errors. So because of that it will show me the interpreter again. So here I need to provide my interpreter Java, and again I need to provide my class name here like student constructor. Student constructor. So now you can see the first student details Kaushik 15 male Penduti, and the second student details are Uday 35 male and Gopalpatnam. Right? So by using parameterized constructor we can assign values to your data members of a class student constructor here. By using this display method, we are going to display what are the values we are assigned with your objects. So here we are finding the difference for method and constructor, and all the remaining is similar. So now coming to our next topic is copy constructor. So this is not a type of your constructor. So copy constructor is a feature in Java which is going to assign the values of one object to another object. Like see here in previous example what we seen just now, we are having two objects. One object is SC and second one is SC1. Like we have two objects. And we are assigning two different values to those objects. Like SC is having Kaushik details and SC1 object is having Uday details. So now here my concept is I want to copy the values of one object with another object. So then I am going to use the concept of copy constructor in Java programming. So in Java, a copy constructor is a special type of constructor that creates an object using another object of the same Java class. So here I can deal with the same class. I cannot create the object for another class in some other class. I cannot do that. So I am creating an object to the same class by using the existing object, and it returns a duplicate copy of an existing object of the class. Obviously, whatever the value that my first object can hold, the same values can be hold my second object, because I just copying the content of object 1 to object 2. That is my purpose. So for that I am using copy constructor. So at that time when I am creating my constructor, I can pass object of a class as a parameter. That's what the thing, and all the remaining things are same, right? So I'll demonstrate with an example. Like we have a copy constructor example. So I think student. Yes, student. So we'll move on to topic of. So this is an example for copy constructor. So when I'm using here import java util.scanner, so this is my package so that you all can understand that. Now I'm going to take values and I'm going to assign to my data members through the keyboard. So I don't want to give anything directly. So I can use my keyboard to give the values, right? So for that simply I'm using like this. So this is my class student, and this student is having two data members like name and age, and you can see these are private, so I cannot access the name and age of the student outside of my class. I cannot access means outside of class I can take my main method, I cannot access. I can access within this class only. And now you can see this is my constructor and we can observe that this is a parameterized constructor. So this is the way how I am going to assign my values to my data members of a class, name and age. And here you can find this is a copy constructor because the constructor is having the object of the same class as an argument. So see, student is a class. So when you are passing student as a class, obviously the std is an object which I am created for a class student. So in this way, we can create copy constructors in Java. So for creating a copy constructor, what simply we can do? So simply we can take a constructor and we can pass object of a class as an arguments to your constructor. So that is the way you are implementing the copy constructor in Java programming. So simply what I am going to do, I want to take a data member and I want to assign the object name. Means std is an existing object. So now this existing object name I am going to assign to my new object, and this existing age I am going to assign to my new object age. So by using display data method, I am going to display the name and age. So this is a display method and this is my main method. In that main method, I am going to give a values for my data members using keyboard. So that simply here I'm using a scanner class and this is an object for scanners class. And now I'm using new scanner of. Here I'm going to pass system.in because I need to specify from where I need to take my input. So from keyboard I need to take, so that I'm given here system.in as an argument to my scanner class. So simply this is a system.out.println statement and which is going to take a value for name and for age. So name is of string. So simply I can give next or next line you can give anything is correct. And for integer I can give next int method. And after that here you can see this is my parameterized constructor. Yes or no? So whatever the values you are given for name and age, that is going to be taken by this parameterized constructor. And when you are creating this object std, it is going to assign those values to this parameterized constructor. And after that, you want to display the content of your first object, simply you can call std.display. So display data method is going to display the name and age of the student. And then here I am creating one more object, that is copy of std, and here for constructor I am passing existing object std. See, std is an existing object and copy of std is my new object. So what simply I need to pass? I need to pass my existing object so that this constructor is going to call, and the value of the first object in the name is going to assign to my second object copy of std, and age is going to assign to my second object copy of std. So now by using this object I am going to call my method display.data, which is going to show the same output because we are taking values for your original object and then we are trying to copy the same values to your duplicate object, that is of your copied object. So after copying, both object is having the same values. So that is the purpose of copy constructor in Java programming. So I will execute this program. So now you can see Java C, and here my class name is student.java. So now here I am going to execute so that I can give Java and my class name is student. So it will ask me enter the name. I will give it Devi, and it will ask me the age. I will give my age. So now you can see content of the original object is Devi and 36, and content of the copied object is also Devi and 36. So this is the way how you are going to create a copy of constructors concept in Java programming. Simply whenever we want to make a copy of constructor in Java programming, at the time of constructor, instead of parameters, you are going to assign object of the same class. And then the values assignment is like this. So instead of calling name and age something, you just use object dot name and object dot age. So this is of copy constructor. And move on to next is constructor overloading. So constructor overloading in Java is a technique of having more than one constructor with different parameters list in Java programming. So like you can write multiple constructors in a same program. So as like what I did just now. In your copy constructors, I have two constructors in my program. One is parameterized constructor and then I have a copy constructor. So I have more than one constructor in my program. So now simply that concept is said to be a constructor overloading because I'm having the same constructor name and with a different functionality. So the same constructor name is going to do different tasks. So it depends on I'm passing the parameters list in my program. So they are arranged in a way that each constructor perform a different task and they are differentiated by the compiler by the number of parameters in the list and their types. Because see I already said like in your constructor concept you can take the constructor name is same as to your class name. So even though I am taking number of constructor in my program and every constructor is having the same name. So that how the compiler can differentiate one constructor to another constructor. So which constructor it is going to instantiate it or it is going to instance. That is depends on the number of arguments or the type of arguments you are passing to your constructor. So I'll demonstrate with a simple example so you all can understand. So now we have constructor overload. So I'll take it as a student overload I think. So now we have a program like student overload. So now you can see. So I'll go with the same example. So you can differentiate the differences of constructors from one to another. Because of that reason I'm taking the same example. Now you can see here my class name is student overload. And these are the data members I have like student name, roll number, gender and address. And this is my default constructor. You all know this is my constructor name and I doesn't having any arguments here and I didn't have any body of the statements here. If you want to do and you can give simply the printf statements and that is going to display this that is going to show you and this default constructor is instanced by your compiler. It is called by your compiler. So if you want to recognize that you can give any of the statement which is going to display on your screen. So simply I am given like constructor called. So system.out.println. So out will give you your monitor. So here I need to call like constructor default constructor called. So now you can see here is my default constructor. So here it is called and whenever this default constructor is called by your compiler it is going to display like default constructor is called. And you can see this is a parameterized constructor. So why it is parameterized constructor? Because I am passing some parameters here. So by this parameterized constructor I am going to assign a values for my student name, roll number, gender and address. And now you can see this is also parameterized constructor. But here I have 4 data members and here I have only 2. So now you can observe that same name means we have a multiple constructors and each and every constructor is differentiated by the number of parameters I am passing. Here 0 parameters and here I have 4 parameters and here I have 2 parameters. So when I am given only 2, so what the remaining the rest of things will be happen here. So for the rest of gender and address when I am calling this constructor, so whatever the values I am passing by my object, those values is going to assign to my student name and roll number, and the default values is going to assign for gender and address. Right? Because I have 4 data members, but I am interested to give all values for only 2. And what about the remaining? So obviously the remaining values can be taken by the default constructor, and it is going to assign with the default values. And here it is my display method, which is my normal method, and I am going to display all my details of a class. And this is my main method, and here I created, see, I can jumble this. So first I called parameterized constructor. So in which order I called, and the same order it can follow. So now I am creating 3 objects here, SC, SC1 and SO. These are 3 different objects. And this object will call the parameterized constructor with 4 arguments, because here I am passing 4 arguments. So whenever you calling your constructors, means whenever you are creating the objects, so what the compiler will do, it is need to match with your constructor, because we have 3 constructors here. Now your compiler is going to initiate any one of these constructors by your constructor calling. Right? So here I am calling first a constructor with 4 arguments. Now it is matched with this constructor, and it is going to assign values for student name, roll number, gender and address. And later I am calling my constructor with 2 arguments. So it is going to match with this. And then third one, it is going to call my third thing. Like see, I'll show you the same thing, because at the output, whatever you want, it will give you like that only. So because of that, I will make the differentiation and I'll show you. So here, backslash n is for next line. Means after completion of first object details, I am going to go for the next line and display the things. Otherwise, it will be concatenated with your previous output. Because of that reason, here I am using backslash n, which will take your output to next line. So now I just save and run this program. So my program name is Student Overload. So here I am given Java C Student Overload dot Java. Okay. So this is a string, right? So I need to give in a double quotation, not a single quotation. It is accepted. So I need to give in a double quotation. So if you have any errors at compile time, it doesn't prompt you or it doesn't give you any command prompt. So you have to rectify errors, and you can say make the changes of your things, and then you can execute. So now here I am calling same like student overload.java. So now here I need to execute my program. So simply I can use my interpreter. So I can pass my class name student overload. So now you can see. So here second student details will be displayed first, then third student. Now you can find out that for the third object I just pass only 2 values like Uday and 35. And the remaining data members is going to be assigned with the default values. And when I am calling the default constructor, it is going to assign the default values to all my data members of a class. Okay, so this is about a constructor overloading. So overloading is nothing but we can use more than one time the same constructor name in your program. So I am using 3 different constructor in my class. So because of that, I can say this is a constructor overloading. When you have more than one time the constructor, the compiler can differentiate it one to another by their number of arguments we are passing to your constructor, or the type of arguments you are passing to your constructor. So depends on that. It is going to differentiate. See, you can see here I have 4 and here I have 2 only. So that too, one is string and another one is integer. Suppose if I change this with another value, suppose if I am taken like this, I'll show you. Control Z, and here I am going to take Control V, and now here you need to change. This is gender. So gender, and this gender is going to assign with G. Now you can see here I changed the data type. In previous it is one string and integer, now it is two strings. So depends on this your so that here I need to pass like main here also, because when I'm taking my constructor with two strings, I need to pass two string values, right? So now I just save and run the same program. Now you can find out the difference. Now you can see. So Kaushik, age, male and Penduti. And whereas for this, I'm passing two string values. One is for name and another is for gender. And this is my age. I didn't pass any value, so this is assigned with default value 0. And for address also, I didn't pass any value. Because of that, it is assigned with none. So this is constructor overloading. And the next concept and the last concept in today's session is constructor chaining. So chaining is nothing but we are calling one constructor in another constructor. So simply that concept in Java is said to be constructor chaining, right? So I just call one constructor in another constructor. So and all the remaining is same. So whenever you use the concept of constructors in Java programming, the main purpose is to initialize the object attributes or the data members of your class. It cannot do more than that. And depends on the concept we are using, either default, parameterized, copy, or we can have like constructor overloading. So the assigning things are going to be different and the remaining is same. So here the last one is constructor chaining. Okay, so in this constructor chaining, simply what we are going to do is like we can call one constructor in another constructor, like we are making a nesting things. So that is the only thing. So I will show you with an example of this constructor chaining concept. So I will add that slide and I will send it to you in your group. I forgot to adding that theoretical part. So I just run the program and I will demonstrate you with the program. So that I taken like no. Student default, yes, I think student details. No, I'll arrange my date. Yes, constructor chaining. So here you can see my class name is constructor chaining. So this is my constructor, and you can see this is my default constructor, and I have only a system.out.println statement. And you can observe that whenever you want to implement chaining concept of constructors in Java programming, you can use the first statement as this. So now in your this, which value you are going to pass, and depends on that, it is going to call that type of constructor. Now you can see here by using this default constructor, I am going to call a constructor which consisting one string. Now you can observe that. So here I have one string. So I just call in my default constructor, I am going to call this. So now you can see in this, I am going to pass two integers. So now in my constructor with one argument, I am going to call constructor with two arguments. So that is a chaining. So in default constructor, I am going to call this constructor. By this constructor, I am going to call this constructor. So now how the constructor is going to executed. So whenever I am calling the constructor with two integers, I am going to perform an addition operation. So in main, you simply create your constructor, the object. So here I don't need any object for instantiating my constructors. Because of that reason, I'm not creating any object. I just taken my constructor. So now here when I am calling this constructor, simply what it is happens. So now it is going to call, and now it is going to call this method, and this is going to call this method. So after that means when it happens in a first line, so first this is going to be executed, then this is going to execute, then this is going to execute. Because nesting, right? Suppose see for example we have three friends. The first friend is going to call second friend, and second friend is going to call third friend. So who will respond first? Obviously the third person, then second person, then first person. The same thing will happens here. So I'll show you the execution part so you can understand what I'm trying to say. So Java C, and here my class name is Constructor Chaining dot Java. So simply I need to provide my Java here, and here I need to provide my class name. So now you can see which is executed first. It is executed. This one is executed first, right? Because by this default constructor, and this constructor is going to invoke it. By this constructor and this constructor, before we are print this value, what simply we are doing? We are calling another constructor. Before we are going to print this value, what we are doing? We are going to call another constructor. So this is a chaining of constructor or nesting of constructors. So simply chaining of constructors in Java is nothing but we are calling one constructor from another constructor. So that is the concept of chaining of constructors. So I hope you all can understand today's session. So after this, I just I'm going to provide today's attendance link in live chat, and I will share today document along with the programs in your group itself. Just go through, and here I am passing my files with .java extension, right? I think in mobiles it is not going to open directly. So simply you can open with text editor, then it is show you all these programming part, right? So if you have any doubts, you just ping the doubts in your chat box. It is great.